In the year 2000, a small startup with fewer than 30 employees and a shaky business model flew to Dallas, Texas, and asked for a meeting with the most powerful man in home entertainment. The startup was called Netflix. The man was John Antioco, CEO of Blockbuster, a company worth roughly $5 billion, with more than 9,000 stores and a presence in nearly every strip mall in America. Netflix wanted to sell. Their offer was $50 million, and in exchange, Blockbuster would get full ownership of a company that would later be worth over $200 billion. Blockbuster's executives reportedly laughed them out of the room. 10 years later, Blockbuster was bankrupt. Netflix was unstoppable. This is the story of how that happened, not as a simple tale of bad luck, but as a slow, traceable collapse built on choices, blind spots, and a business that forgot to ask what its customers actually wanted. Blockbuster's story begins in 1985 in Dallas, when a software entrepreneur named David Cook opened the first Blockbuster video store. At the time, video rental was a fragmented, almost amateurish industry. Thousands of small mom-and-pop shops with limited inventory, inconsistent hours, and shelves that rarely had the new releases people actually wanted. Cook saw an opportunity in that chaos. He built Blockbuster around something radically simple for the era: scale, technology, and selection. His stores used computerized inventory systems to track rentals in real time, which meant Blockbuster always knew what was popular and could stock accordingly. While competitors guessed, Blockbuster measured. The stores themselves were also a calculated departure from the rental shops people were used to. Bright lighting, wide aisles, family-friendly branding, and an enormous selection of titles made Blockbuster feel less like a back-alley video shop and more like a retail experience. It was clean, organized, and reliable. And for millions of families, the Friday night ritual of walking the aisles to pick a movie became a genuine cultural habit. Growth accelerated dramatically after 1987, when Wayne Huizenga, a businessman who had already built waste management into a national giant, bought a controlling stake in the company. Huizenga brought an aggressive, almost relentless expansion philosophy. He didn't believe in growing slowly and protecting margins. He believed in growing fast and owning the market before anyone else could. Under his leadership, Blockbuster expanded at a pace that seems almost unbelievable in hindsight, opening new stores at a rate of roughly one per day during its peak years. By the early 1990s, Blockbuster wasn't just a video rental chain. It was rapidly becoming a household name synonymous with the concept of renting a movie at all. Huizenga also pursued an aggressive acquisition strategy, buying up regional and independent rental chains across the country and converting them into Blockbuster locations. This wasn't just growth, it was consolidation. Blockbuster was systematically eliminating its competition, one regional chain at a time, until it effectively became the default option for home movie rental in most of the United States. In 1994, media giant Viacom acquired Blockbuster for around $8 billion, a deal that placed the company under the umbrella of one of the largest entertainment conglomerates on Earth. By the late 1990s, Blockbuster had grown to thousands of locations worldwide, with annual revenues climbing past $5 billion. It was, by every traditional measure, one of the most successful retail businesses in American history. To understand why Blockbuster eventually became vulnerable, you first have to understand the engine that made it so profitable and so resented. Late fees. When a customer rented a movie, they were given a return deadline, typically a couple of days. Miss that deadline, and the fees began accumulating. sometimes reaching or exceeding the original cost of renting the movie itself. For Blockbuster, this wasn't a minor side revenue stream. At its peak, late fees were estimated to generate somewhere between $400 and $800 million a year, depending on the period, a staggering portion of the company's total profit. Some analysts have estimated that late fees accounted for as much as a sixth of Blockbuster's overall revenue in certain years. This created an uncomfortable incentive structure at the heart of the business. The company's profitability was partly built on customer failure, on people forgetting to return a movie on time. Executives knew this. Internal discussions about late fees treated them less as a customer service problem and more as a dependable cash flow source. And for a while, it worked. Customers grumbled, but they kept coming back because Blockbuster's selection and convenience were unmatched. What made the system especially effective, from a pure revenue standpoint, was how little it cost Blockbuster to collect. There was no additional staffing required, no extra inventory, no marketing spend. The fee was simply built into the point-of-sale system, charged automatically the moment a customer returned a disc late or tried to rent something new while a balance was outstanding. It was, in financial terms, almost pure margin. That kind of effortless, recurring profit is exactly the sort of revenue stream a large public company becomes reluctant to question, especially when quarterly earnings reports are built around hitting consistent growth targets. Wall Street wanted predictable numbers, and late fees were among the most predictable numbers Blockbuster had. But the resentment was real, and it was building. Surveys at the time consistently showed that late fees were the single most common complaint customers had about the rental experience. Some markets even saw early legal pressure over the practice. A handful of class action lawsuits in the early 2000s accused Blockbuster of deceptive fee practices, arguing customers weren't always clearly informed of how charges would accumulate. Blockbuster settled several of these cases without admitting wrongdoing, but the lawsuits were a visible signal that the late fee model was becoming a liability, not just a quiet annoyance. Blockbuster had created a business model where its most loyal customers were also its most frustrated ones. That frustration would later become one of Netflix's most effective weapons, not through advertising, but through the simple absence of a fee that everyone hated. Netflix was founded in 1997 by Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph. The popular origin story, that Hastings was inspired after being charged a $40 late fee on a rented copy of Apollo 13, has been disputed by Randolph and others close to the company. But whether or not that exact moment happened, the underlying insight was accurate. People hated late fees, and a rental model built around avoiding them entirely would resonate. Netflix's original business model wasn't streaming. It was DVD rental by mail, paired with a subscription structure that eliminated due dates entirely. Customers paid a flat monthly fee, received DVDs through the mail, and could keep them for as long as they wanted before mailing them back and receiving the next title on their list. There were no late fees because there was no concept of late. It was a direct surgical response to the exact pain point Blockbuster had built its profit model around. For years, Netflix operated as a modest, niche alternative, convenient for some, but far from a threat to a company with thousands of physical stores and instant gratification built into its model. That changed in the year 2000, when Netflix, struggling for capital during the dot-com downturn, approached Blockbuster with a partnership proposal. The offer was straightforward. Netflix would run Blockbuster's online and subscription business, while Blockbuster handled the in-store experience. The asking price was $50 million. Blockbuster's leadership rejected the offer. By most accounts, they didn't see DVD by mail as a serious business. It was slow, It lacked the instant satisfaction of walking into a store and walking out with a movie the same night. From the perspective of a company generating billions in annual revenue from thousands of physical locations, a small mail-order subscription service must have looked like a rounding error, not a future competitor. That single meeting and that single rejection has become one of the most studied moments in modern business history. A textbook example of an incumbent failing to recognize a disruptive threat because it didn't resemble the existing business. It would be inaccurate to say Blockbuster did nothing in response to Netflix. The real story is more complicated and in some ways more tragic, because Blockbuster did eventually try to compete, just years later than it should have. In 2004, under CEO John Antioco, Blockbuster launched Blockbuster Online, its own DVD-by-mail subscription service designed to directly compete with Netflix. The following year, Antioco made an even bolder move. He eliminated late fees company-wide, a decision that struck directly at the resentment Netflix had been capitalizing on. On paper, these were exactly the kinds of moves a company needed to make to adapt. But the execution revealed deep structural problems. Eliminating late fees alone cost Blockbuster an estimated hundreds of millions of dollars in lost annual revenue, since that fee structure had been propping up profitability for years. The company hadn't built a sustainable alternative revenue model to replace it. It had simply removed a major profit center under competitive pressure, without fully restructuring the business around its absence. At the same time, internal conflict was tearing at the top of the company. Carl Icahn, an activist investor who had taken a significant stake in Blockbuster, openly opposed Antioco's strategy of investing heavily in the online business, arguing it was too expensive and too risky. This wasn't a quiet disagreement. It became a very public boardroom battle, and it ended with Antioco resigning in 2007, replaced by Jim Keyes, a former 7-Eleven executive whose strategic vision for Blockbuster leaned heavily back toward in-store retail and trying to extract more profit from existing physical locations, rather than aggressively pursuing the online and digital shift that was already reshaping the industry. This is, in many ways, the central tragedy of Blockbuster's collapse. The company actually had the resources, the brand recognition, and even early entries into the right kinds of products. What it lacked was organizational conviction, a leadership team willing to fully commit to cannibalizing its own profitable physical retail model before someone else did it for them. While Blockbuster was fighting internal battles over strategy, the ground was shifting beneath the entire industry. Netflix launched its streaming service in 2007, allowing subscribers to instantly watch a limited library of content without waiting for a disc to arrive in the mail at all. It was clunky at first, and the selection was far smaller than what Blockbuster could offer in a physical store. But it solved the one problem DVD by mail still had: the wait. Streaming technology removed the entire physical layer of the rental business. No discs, no mail, no store visits, no inventory to manage. For a company like Blockbuster, whose competitive advantage had always been rooted in physical scale, thousands of stores, massive inventory, prime retail locations, streaming wasn't just a new competitor. It was an attack on the very foundation the company's value had been built on for 2 decades. Blockbuster did eventually attempt its own digital initiatives, including video-on-demand services and later its own streaming efforts. But these came later, were underfunded relative to the scale of investment Netflix was making, and lacked the technical infrastructure and content negotiation leverage that Netflix had been building for years. By the time Blockbuster took streaming seriously, Netflix already had a multi-year head start in technology, in licensing relationships with studios, and in the subscriber data needed to refine recommendations and retain customers. There was also a quieter, less visible disadvantage working against Blockbuster: data. Every time a Netflix subscriber rated a film or queued a new title, the company gathered another small piece of information about viewing habits. Information it used to refine recommendations, negotiate licensing deals, and eventually decide which original shows to fund. Blockbuster's in-store rental model generated far less of this kind of structured behavioral data, and what it did collect wasn't centralized or analyzed with anywhere near the same intensity. By the time streaming became the dominant battleground, Netflix wasn't just ahead in infrastructure. It understood its audience in a way Blockbuster never had the tools or the incentive to match. The pressure built fast, and it came from more than one direction at once. Blockbuster was carrying heavy debt, partly from its Viacom-era leverage, partly from trying to fund thousands of physical stores and a competing online service at the same time. Two expensive bets pulling money in opposite directions. Foot traffic kept falling as Netflix grew month over month, but Blockbuster couldn't just shrink to match. It was still locked into thousands of long-term retail leases, fixed costs that didn't care whether customers were still walking through the door. In September 2010, Blockbuster filed for Chapter 11, listing debt of roughly $900 million. The company tried to reorganize, but by then, the market had already moved on. In 2011, Dish Network picked up what was left of Blockbuster for around $320 million, a fraction of the $5 billion valuation the company had carried barely 10 years before. Dish shut down most of the remaining stores not long after. By 2019, only one store remained open, an independently run location in Bend, Oregon, that survives today as more of a tourist attraction and nostalgia stop than a real piece of a national chain. Netflix, meanwhile, kept climbing for years afterward. Subscribers, revenue, market value, all moving in one direction. It eventually became one of the most valuable media companies on the planet, built on the exact subscription model Blockbuster once looked at, and decided wasn't worth $50 million. The easy version of this story is Netflix innovated, Blockbuster didn't. But Blockbuster wasn't blind to the threat. It had chances to buy or partner with Netflix, and took some of them, just late and half-committed. The real failure was structural. Every decision got filtered through protecting late fees and retail scale, not building what would replace them. Killing late fees in 2005 was the right call made too early to support. Blockbuster Online was the right idea, undercut by boardroom infighting, and hiring leadership to refocus on stores just as the industry moved online sealed it. Blockbuster also misread its customers. It thought its edge was selection and the in-store experience. What people actually wanted was friction removed. No due dates, no fees, no trips. Netflix didn't win with more movies. It won by killing the parts of the experience people already hated. Disruption never looks dangerous early. Netflix in 2000 looked slow and niche, easy to dismiss, except it was solving a real frustration the incumbent ignored. Profitable inefficiencies are dangerous. Late fees made Blockbuster money, but that profit was really a signal of unmet need, a vulnerability waiting to be exploited, not a moat. Half measures lose to full commitment. Blockbuster tried to compete while still protecting retail, splitting its focus. Netflix was willing to cannibalize its own DVD business for streaming. Hedging between the old profitable model and the new uncertain one usually starves the thing that could have saved you. Leadership conviction matters. Blockbuster's strategy flipped with every leadership change, swinging back to retail at exactly the wrong moment. Survival needs sustained direction, not reactive pivots chasing short-term investor pressure. And the uncomfortable one: size isn't protection. It can slow you down. Blockbuster's scale was its strength for 20 years, then became the anchor that made every pivot slower and costlier. Netflix could rebuild around streaming in a few years because it had almost nothing physical to unwind. Being big isn't the problem. Being big and inflexible is, and it often doesn't show up until it's too late. Blockbuster wasn't killed by one bad call. It was worn down by years of choosing comfortable over necessary, protecting a profitable past instead of building an uncertain future. In a Dallas conference room in 2000, a $5 billion empire looked at the company that would replace it and decided it wasn't worth $50 million. That's the autopsy. The body was healthy, right up until it wasn't.